Hi, all. Today, I want to wrap up some of our discussion about mouse and ultimately lead us into the questions we will be asking as we get to work on Capstone 2. But I want to get started with a very interesting term that has just come into discourse recently, and that term is pajamification. Yes, pajamification. I am calling your attention now to a Teen Vogue article that appeared last year. It's called Banning Books Like Mouse is Part of Sanitizing History. And it's an op-ed that appeared in Teen Vogue by Gwen Katz and A.R. Vishny. And they talk about mouse in the broader context of banning books, but also in the context of the essential work that mouse does for readers. So the text opens up. Hold on, let me just adjust this so you can see a little bit. One moment. So this text starts out with this quote from the meeting in the Tennessee School Board from that determined that mouse would be banned. Quote, "There is nothing pretty about the Holocaust, and for me, this was a great way to depict a horrific time in history," said school board member and former history teacher Julie Gooden during a January meeting of the McMinn County, Tennessee School Board. Quote, "It's hard for this generation. These kids don't even know about 9/11. They were not even born. For me, this was his way to convey the message," she explained, referring to Art Spiegelman's Pulitzer Prize-winning graphic novel, Mouse. But Gooden's words were to no avail, and the school board unanimously voted to remove Mouse from its 8th grade language arts curriculum. Several members of the school board cited nudity, violence, and strong language, but many were immediately skeptical of the school board's stated reason for implementing the ban. Mouse is the latest high-profile victim, it's an interesting word choice, of a wave of book banning in public schools and libraries across the country, and evidence of a disturbing national trend to suppress honest accounts of marginalized histories in favor of comfortable ones. And I think that word comfortable is a word we have heard over and over again. Who in the classroom is allowed to be comfortable, and whose comfort is often disregarded? Now go on. The desire for softened accounts of history is hardly new, nor is it unique to this school board. In the area of Holocaust education, this trend might be thought of as pajamification, a reference for the kind of fiction that is best embodied by John Boyne's 2006 novel, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. Now, I don't know how many of you have read this book, but it is a fictional account of a young child who befriends another child, a Jewish child, from across the fence. This child is not Jewish, but we as readers witness in this fictionalized account the child's perspective as he sees innocently what is happening to his quote unquote friend. Now, this article itself in Teen Vogue came out from a Twitter thread that I'm going to direct your attention to now. And so I think it's important because it introduces to us why this type of writing, right? We've already talked about things that are, Art Spiegelman's, for example, his refusal to romanticize his father and depict him as a more perfect human rather than the complicated human he's being. And so pajamification is almost the antithesis of this. And I want to show you the Twitter thread from which this emerged before coming back to the article. Right? So this is Gwen C. Katz, and this is the Twitter thread that started this. There's a phenomenon I actually see extremely commonly when literature is used to teach history to middle school and high school students. Let's call it pajamification. So a school district nixed Maus from their curriculum to be replaced by something more, quote, age appropriate. IIRC, they didn't cite a specific replacement title, but will probably be something like John Boyne's The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is tailor-made for classroom use. It's taught at countless schools, and it's squeaky clean of any of the parent objectionable material you might find in Maus, Knights, or any other first-person accounts of the Holocaust. And I think that observation is particularly important. Who tells the story? Katz goes on to say, it is also a terrible way to teach the Holocaust. I'm not going to exhaustively enumerate the book's flaws. Others have done so, but I'll summarize the points that are common to this phenomenon in various contexts. First, obviously, the context shift. My Maus, Knights, etc., are narrated by actual Jews who were in concentration camp. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is narrated by a German boy. The Jewish perspective is completely eliminated. So that's, I think, part of what she meant by first person versus kind of fictionalized non-first person accounts, and also shifting the perspective to somebody who was not experiencing but only witnessing the atrocity. But second, the emphasis on historical innocence. Bruno, that's the main character, isn't anti-Semitic. He has no idea that anything bad is happening. He happily befriends a Jewish boy with absolutely no prejudice. Thus, we're reassured that you too, gentle reader, are innocent. You too would have a childlike lack of prejudice, and you too would be such a sweet summer child that you would have no idea the place next door is a death camp. Right. And there's sarcasm here too, right? Kind of that trope of being the innocent bystander, when in reality, many people would argue there's no such thing, right? We're all witness to atrocities that are happening around us, and claiming innocence, unless you are an actual child, often doesn't work. And certainly the adult reader cannot claim that subject position. In Maus, by contrast, the children are not innocent. They are perpetrators of injustice, just like adults, right? And we saw this example, in fact, in what we read, right? These are a series of panels where a Polish child screams, "Help, mommy, a Jew," right? And again, we can think about them in the context of the propaganda that they were receiving, and something that we've talked about over the course of this unit. But nevertheless, this is the behavioral performance. Right? Quick, the mothers came outside to see what was. The mothers always told so, "Be careful, a Jew will catch you and to bag and eat you." So they taught to their children. I approached over to them. He says, with the salute, Heil Hitler. If I ran away, they would see, yes, it is a Jew here. And notice, by the way, that trope of masks, I think, is very interesting. Don't be afraid, little ones. I'm not a Jew. I won't hurt you. Sorry, mister, you know how kids are. Heil Hitler. Right. So again, a scene that demonstrates complicity from the environment is in part one of the themes of Maus. Maus also smashes the claim that people just didn't know what was going on in the camps. Okay. And this is actually in the last scene in Maus 1. And we came here to the concentration camp Auschwitz, and we knew that meant from here, we will not come out anymore. You have the sign on the entrance to the camps, right? You have the trains coming in. We knew the stories, that they will gas us and throw us in the ovens. This was 1944. We knew everything. And here we were, right? And think about the context of 1944, given, again, the chronology that we've talked about throughout this course of the unit, starting in 1933 to the start of the war in 1939, and the building of the camps over the course of this time, and the implementation of the final solution. By 1944, Maus is arguing this was all well-known information. Third, non-specificity. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas turns a specific historical atrocity into a parable about all forms of bigotry and injustice. I'm sure Boyne thinks he's being very profound, but the actual effect is to blunt and erase the atrocity. There's the too cute by halfway. It avoids terminology, right? Using terms like off with or the fury. Harsh language becomes, he said a nasty word, right? Because again, it's mediated through this childlike, innocent perspective. Notice how "it's a fable" ties in with the goal of eliminating anything parents might object to. And that's our fourth point. Bad things can happen, but only abstractly, right? And the boy in the striped pajamas. Someone's dad disappears. He's just gone. How? Who knows? People stand around looking hungry and unhappy and saying, it's not very nice in here, which is, of course, obviously a very understatement. The ending is sad, but it's not sad, but it's sad like a Lifetime movie. It's sanitized, it's quick, there are no details. It's meant to poke that bit of your heart that loves crying. Mouse description of the gas chambers, meanwhile, and again, this is a little bit heavier information, and this is a panel that we did not encounter in our reading because this is Mouse 2. So if this is an iconography that's uncomfortable to you, feel free to look away for a moment. Those of you who are still looking, it doesn't show corpses, right? But it does describe what it looked like, right? The crowds inside, the Zyklon B being dropped, the act of genocide, and the remainder, right? The outcome of it in terms of what happens to the human beings, how they come out now as bodies, and then the labor that had to be done by the people who, as prisoners, were forced to work in these horrific conditions. And rather than read it out loud, those of you who are still have your eyes on the screen, I'll just pause for a moment so you can look at it. So moving on. A historical atrocity can never be a metaphor for all bigotry because the specifics are what make it an atrocity. The Nazis didn't just do bad things generally. They did these things, right? These things. And leaving out the details is simply historical erasure. Finally, fifth, fiction. However much poor little Bruno and Shmuel might rend your heartstrings, you can ultimately retreat into the knowledge that they aren't real and didn't really die, right? These are fictional characters. Now, I write historical fiction, and obviously I believe it has a place in the classroom and out. But no Holocaust education can be complete without nonfiction that teaches about real people who genuinely did experience it. One of the striking things about Mouse is how big the cast is and how few of them survived, right? This is also kind of the various kind of unravelings, right? That and the losses that Vladek recounts to Art. Again, I'm just pausing for you to look at this image, right? It's not in the text we covered. Likewise, the next one. Because it's a true story, Mouse can also explore neglected aspects like the intergenerational trauma, which simply vanish in a pat fictional story that is just finished when you get to the end, right? Which we've talked about a lot. Again, that how this is very much a story about how Art and his generation were also very impacted by the horrific trauma their parents survived, right? And this iconography here, which we haven't seen, we have not read it, but actually appeared in some other clips we've watched. Right? And kind of, again, the history he feels weighing on him. Thus, books like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas are not an age-appropriate equivalent way to teach the Holocaust, but a false construction of history. This ends the first part of the thread, but there's more. The Mouse incident is not an isolated case. It's part of a broad trend of replacing the literature used to teach history with more kid-friendly, appropriate alternatives. And outside of the Holocaust, it usually doesn't meet with much controversy. It might mean replacing narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, or Solomon Northup's 12 Years a Slave with modern historical fiction, for example. Wars, the civil rights movement, apartheid, any icky part of history can be a target. But it plays out along the same general lines. Primary sources replaced with modern fiction, victim perspectives replaced with perpetrators, specificity replaced with star-bellied sneak styles. Why can't we all just get along metaphors? The broad trend is destruction and recreation of history. The actual events, as narrated by the people they happen to, are declared unacceptable in their current states, and they are replaced with books tailored to modern sensibilities, which are then declared the correct account. And these modern books can still depict bigotry and so on, but the angle will be changed just enough to make modern audiences not feel weird or gross. The primary source works will then get rejected for the crime of making people feel weird and gross. We, that's all of us, need to reject this trend whenever it occurs in all areas of history. We must read and teach true accounts written by the people who really experienced these events. There is no other honest account of history. Read Maus, read Night, read 12 Years a Slave, give them to your children, and then discuss with them what they read. And they followed up. When a thread like this gets big, everyone assumes you're an expert. So this thread is nothing but one random individual's thoughts. I am not a Holocaust survivor or descendant or a Holocaust scholar. Please talk to actual experts if you wish to learn more. But what I think is really powerful is that this then continued into the Teen Vogue article, which I referenced at the beginning and I'm bringing back here, right? So we saw the introduction, right? And so now kind of a return to the article, right? That breaks down this concept of pajamification like we saw in the Twitter thread, right? Boyne's novel about a young German boy who befriends a young Jewish prisoner on the other side of the fence has been widely panned by academics and sourced by a number of academics and sources, including the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum, for being particularly implausible work of fiction. Critics say the book perpetuates a number of demonstrably false ideas about the ignorance of German civilians to the Holocaust, the passivity of Jewish victims, and the pervasive nature of anti-Semitism in Europe. Nevertheless, this book and others like it are often used to teach the Holocaust because, regardless of their intent, these narratives do not challenge or educate readers, but serve to comfort them. In the past, Boyne has responded to the criticism of his novel, defending his work, and I'm sure you can look that up as well. But let's talk about the key hallmarks. Let's focus on pajamification, right? Because the key hallmarks of pajamification are, and this should be reminiscent of the thread. First, shift the focus from the underprivileged to the privileged. Second, emphasize the innocence of the characters. Third, minimize the event's specificity and instead render it as a sort of universal morality tale. Fourth, omit details and only refer to violent and disturbing events obliquely and abstractly, right? Meaning like in vague, fuzzy terms. And fifth, replace first-person non-fictional accounts with fiction. The Holocaust is not the only historical event that is subject to pajamification. At various times and places, historical novels have reduced slavery to daring Underground Railroad escapes, Christopher Columbus to an adventurous explorer, and Martin Luther King Jr. to a guy who just wanted everyone to get along. In all of these cases, the effect is the same. A picture of history that is safe and reassuring is presented to students and prevents them from experiencing any uncomfortable feelings about these events, and especially for white students, the roles their ancestors played. Much of the criticism that has arisen against To Kill a Mockingbird, for instance, stems from these factors precisely, reframing Jim Crow through the lens of a white character and turning it into a nostalgic story about childhood. Often pajamified books about the Holocaust star heroic non-Jews who hide and rescue Jews, and the Holocaust becomes the background for a heartwarming, redemptive story instead of the horror it really is. Quote, "If you only tell stories of people who helped hide Jews or were otherwise involved in the war but were not Jewish, it makes it easier to block out the trauma the victim went through," says Rebecca Leviathan, librarian at Baltimore County Public Library. And it's important that we don't ignore what really happened, because just to point out, the children who are then internalizing the history of these events are growing up to become adults who don't think these events are particularly significant and have lasting generational effects on the populations in which they occurred. Okay. Dara Horn, author of People Love Dead Jews, further explains the historical misconception these books create. They're statistically insignificant in the story of the Holocaust, she continues. They're not inspirational stories. They're the opposite of inspirational because they show you what could have happened. For example, why wasn't everyone Denmark? Right? To point out, in Denmark, for example, the civilian population mobilized to help 90% of the Jewish population escape to neutral Sweden, which was both an incredible triumph and a sobering reminder that millions of lives could have been saved if non-Jewish populations of other countries had done the same. In Pajamafied stories, the oppressed people are not depicted as unique individuals with their own cultures, but as symbols that exist purely to teach a lesson about friendship, understanding, and how we're all the same on the inside. Quote, the Holocaust is about the dehumanization of the Jews, Horn tells Teen Vogue. In a sense, there's some overlap between that and making Jews into a feel-good symbol. That's also a form of dehumanization because it's taking away the specifics of the human person who isn't just a victim or a mirror of the reader. So, how do we counter pajamification? First and foremost, we need to center nonfiction. Says Levitan, hearing what actually happened instead of a watered-down version helps to truly educate people about how horrible it was, as well as honor the experiences survivors went through. Of course, there's plenty of excellent fiction out there, and it has its place in the classroom and out, but nothing can ever replace the value of reading first-person accounts written by people who experienced these events, right? And so that's why Vladek's narrative in Maus, for example, is so important. Susan Kusel, library director of the Temple Rodef Shalom Library in Falls Church, Virginia, thinks it's time to update the books we use in the classroom. Quote, Jews fought back in numerous and heroic ways, including as partisan fighters and notably in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, she says. Although I see more of the resistance book on the shelves, I am not seeing them taught in the classroom. I see 20 or 40-year-old books being taught and the curriculum remaining static. Kusel recommends books such as We Must Not Forget, Holocaust Stories of Survival and Resistance by Deborah Hopkinson, and Beyond Courage, The Untold Story of Jewish Resistance During the Holocaust by Doreen Rappaport, and Resistance by Jennifer Nielsen. Okay. So I hope this concept explains pajamification for you and kind of the broader context of book banning. And I want to use that to transition to our goal for the second capstone, which is what I'm going to talk about today very, very briefly. And we'll start kind of going into the specifics in our next lecture. Okay, because Kusel's point, I'm sorry, I left off a piece of the article. Kusel's point is crucial. The problem is not lack of better material. These books and educational resources exist, but they are not being used in classrooms nearly enough. And they won't be if school boards and local governments continue to prioritize personal comfort over the education of their students. And I'm sorry, actually, this transitions far better into our capstone, because in this project, what we're going to be doing is you're going to be creating a PowerPoint. And in your PowerPoint, you're going to be presenting to, you have to imagine your audience is the school board seeking to ban Maus. Okay, your goal will be to design a presentation that focuses on either two individual panels from Maus or two sequences of panels, it doesn't really matter which one, which very visibly use techniques of sequential or comics, right? We've talked about this, the gutter, the framing, the transitions, the dialogue, foregrounding and backgrounding, all the things that have come up in our reading, right? So you want to pick panels that use those strategies and demonstrate how, by their structure, these help reader understand the urgency of learning about the Holocaust, right? Writing in this context of pajamification, why instead are these panels so significant? So all I need you to do between now and next class is select which panels you need to use, you wish to use, and jot down a justification for why you want to use them. You don't need to submit this. I'm not going to collect this just in the interest of time. So this labor is entirely up to you. But just to give you context, in our next lecture, I'm going to be going over the details of what you need to do in each PowerPoint, and then just giving you the option of the next folder to get it done, right? So there's not going to be as much scaffolding for this project as there was in the first project, which is typical, right? As we kind of move up into through 102, we do less hand holding for each project. So you definitely don't want to skip this step, and make sure that you come into Tuesday or into the next set of lectures with an idea of what you want to write about, so that you can kind of immediately get to work. Right? So think about which panels you want to use and how you think by their design, by their use of the strategies of sequential art, they show us why Maus is an important book to teach. So thank you all for joining me today. Any questions or concerns, as always, feel free to reach out, and I look forward to seeing your work. Take care.